Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know how much we love getting your questions, and today we're diving into one that's really got us thinking.
Yeah.
It's all about marriage.
Ah.
Is it necessary or is it fading away? And we're using this really cool episode from Say It Right Pod.
Oh,
I
interesting.
know, right? It's an English language learning podcast, but they actually get into some seriously deep stuff about relationships.
I love that, like, how language learning can kind of give us a window into these
Exactly.
bigger cultural trends, right?
Totally. So the host, Nathan, he's got this listener asking like, hey, is marriage even a thing anymore if we've already got love?
Right.
And he brings on this expert, Dr. Emily Roberts.
Okay.
And she makes this point that really stuck with me. She's like, marriage isn't going anywhere. It's just changing.
I think that's a really key observation because it's not about the disappearance of marriage. It's more like this evolution.
Right.
And she even ties that evolution to how younger generations are thinking about things.
Yeah.
Like they're focusing so much on themselves, their careers, personal growth, all of that.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, like, is it harder for young people to get financially stable these days?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, are those traditional milestones of marriage and family just way more daunting now?
Yeah, it's like, are we talking about a purely economic shift, or is there something deeper happening culturally where individual happiness trumps everything else?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And, Dr. Roberts, she brings up this tension between freedom and commitment.
Okay.
She's basically saying some young people worry about relationships holding them back.
Yeah, especially marriage, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like they think it could stop them from reaching their full potential.
It makes you think, like, is there always this conflict between wanting to be free and being in a committed relationship?
Right.
And how does that play out in real life, like choosing a career, having kids, or even just deciding where to live?
That's that people are trying to figure out how to have it all. The personal fulfillment and the deep connection of a relationship.
It's a tough balance.
It is. And then Dr. Roberts even brings up arranged marriages.
Oh, wow. So we're going way back.
I know, right? Back in the day, they were pretty common.
That really highlights how much things have changed, doesn't it?
Totally. Like she's saying today, those arranged marriages often feel like they're limiting people's choices.
Yeah, makes sense.
People want to build relationships based on love,
Right.
compatibility, shared values, not just because their families or society pressures them into it.
Makes you wonder, is this whole idea of choosing your own partner like a mainly Western thing? Or is it becoming more universal as the world changes?
That is a great question. And honestly, I'm not sure if I have the answer.
It's complex.
It is. But one thing's for sure, the whole landscape of relationships is shifting.
Absolutely.
And the language we use reflect that.
Yes. And Nathan actually points out some interesting vocabulary in this podcast.
He does.
Like partner, arranged marriage, get to know someone, all these terms that reflect how we think about relationships.
Yeah. And using partner is super interesting.
It is, right? It's like we're moving away from that traditional husband-wife thing.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder if it's about wanting more equal relationships.
Right.
Or maybe just acknowledging that partnerships can be so diverse these days.
He also uses relationship in a broader sense. He talks about planning a wedding.
Right, the whole ceremony part of it.
Yeah.
So do you think those more traditional terms alongside this newer idea of partner mean that even though relationships are changing,
Yeah.
those core desires and rituals around love and commitment are still important?
Totally. Like it seems people are trying to find that balance,
Yeah,
wanting personal freedom, but also craving that deep human connection.
such a human thing, isn't it?
It is. And this podcast, even though it's for English learners, it gives us this peek into how people are actually talking about these things.
It does.
So I think it's time we tackle the big question head on.
Okay, I'm ready.
Is marriage actually necessary for a happy life?
That's the one Nathan leaves his listeners with.
Yep. And what's cool is he doesn't try to give a definitive answer.
No, he doesn't.
He just shares his own belief that happiness can come from different types of relationships.
Right.
Marriage, friendships, family. It's all about the quality of those connections.
Which brings us back to that core human need for connection we were talking about.
Exactly. Like no matter how people structure their relationships, that desire for meaningful connection never goes away.
It seems like it's a constant in the human experience.
Totally. And it makes you realize that need can be met in so many ways.
It can.
Marriage is just one path, and it might not be the right one for everybody.
It's about finding what works for you, right?
Exactly. What do you think?
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to finding what truly works for you, whether that's marriage or a committed partnership, or even just having those close friendships and strong family bonds.
Exactly. It's not about fitting into some mold. It's about what brings you happiness.
Right. And Nathan really reinforces that by asking his listeners to share their own thoughts in the comments.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I know, right? It's like
Yeah.
he's starting this global conversation about what happiness means in relationships today.
Yeah, like opening up the dialogue.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that we're all kind of figuring this out together, you know?
It's a shared experience, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And hearing different perspectives can be so valuable.
Absolutely. So then he shifts gears a bit and starts answering some listener questions about learning English.
Oh, yeah. I remember that part.
It might seem like a totally different topic,
Yeah, at first.
but I actually think it ties back into what we've been talking about.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. Learning a new language is kind of like navigating relationships.
I see what you mean.
It takes effort and patience and putting yourself out there.
Right. And being open to making mistakes along the way.
Exactly. And Nathan, he encourages his listeners to practice consistently to really immerse themselves in the language.
It's like embracing the journey, isn't it?
It is. And that applies to so much more than just language learning.
Yeah, whether it's about building relationships, figuring out what makes you happy, or learning a new skill, it's all about being open to new things.
Absolutely. And, celebrating those little wins along the way.
For sure, those little wins keep you going.
They do. And speaking of celebrations, Nathan mentioned something interesting towards the end of the podcast.
Well, what's that?
He brings up World Marriage Day.
Oh, right. It's celebrated on the second Sunday of February.
It's funny how even in a podcast about language learning,
Yeah.
the topic of marriage still finds its way in.
It's like it's always there in the background.
It really is. It makes you think about how important marriage still is in our society.
Even if it's changing.
Exactly. Like, even if people are redefining what it means to them, it still holds a certain weight.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, if marriage isn't the only path to happiness, what else contributes to a fulfilling life?
That's a big question, isn't it?
It is. Like, what are those key ingredients, the values, the connections, the experiences that really matter?
What gives your life purpose and joy?
Maybe it's about striking that balance between personal growth and those deep connections.
Yeah.
Chasing your dreams, but also nurturing the relationships that are important to you.
It could be about defining happiness on your own terms, not just following what society tells you to do.
I think you're right. It's about figuring out what truly makes you happy and going after it.
It's your journey.
It is. And it's not always going to be easy.
No, there will be challenges and doubts along the way.
But those are all part of the process, right?
They are. It's about embracing the ups and downs and allowing yourself to grow from them.
And maybe, just maybe, it's about finding that sweet spot where personal fulfillment meets those meaningful connections.
Yeah, where those two things come together.
And that's what makes life feel authentic and truly satisfying.
I love that. So we've come to the end of this deep dive into relationships and happiness.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We started with a simple question about marriage.
And ended up exploring all these different facets of personal growth and societal shifts.
And what it means to live a happy life.
And I think the biggest takeaway is that there's no right or wrong answer.
It's your journey to define.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what works for you, what aligns with your values, and what brings you joy.
It's about creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and keep seeking out those connections that make life worth living.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And we'd love to hear from you, our listeners.
Yes. What resonated with you most from this deep dive?
What are your thoughts on how relationships are changing and what happiness means in today's world? Let us know in the comments or send us a message. We always love hearing from you.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's kind of amazing how a podcast that's supposed to help people learn English turns into this really thoughtful conversation about relationships and happiness.
It really does. It just goes to show that you can learn from the most unexpected places.
Absolutely. Sometimes the things that make you think the most come from sources you wouldn't expect.
And that's kind of what the deep dive is all about, right?
Exactly. It's about digging into those unusual sources, finding those hidden gems of knowledge,
Yeah.
and coming out of it with a better understanding of ourselves and the world.
It's about challenging what we think we know, expanding our perspectives.
And being open to learning new things throughout our lives.
Totally. And it's about having these conversations, engaging with different viewpoints.
And recognizing that there's no one right answer when it comes to the big questions in life.
So to our listener who sent in this question, thank you so much for sparking this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope this exploration has given you some food for thought, some new perspectives.
And maybe even a little inspiration.
Because remember, the journey doesn't end here.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Keep connecting with others, and most importantly, keep seeking out those things that make your heart sing and your soul soar.
Beautifully said. And that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the topics that matter.